You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
あなたが犯人だとしてこの中の誰を殺す？
超能力か何かですか
2人目も3人目も正面から刺されています。背中から刺されたのは最初の被害者だけです。
Inside a research company, scientists are developing a technology that changes the thoughts of a person into pictures.
I'm taking a class taught by Robert Bree in the spring.
Matthew Andrews and Sarah Austin are university students learning to become neurosurgeons. Sarah Austin lives with a roommate, Anne Plavin.
When she's here, she barely sees me because I spend a lot of hours at the Auburn Hospital.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode along with our honorary Sleazoid, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, we're talking an exploitation legend that we unfortunately lost this year, star of Walking Tall, Joe Don Baker. So join the sleaze.
That's right. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover as well. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for 7+ years. There's like 190, probably coming up on 200 bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release genre films, which we've done over 60 of at this point. So there's a lot of bonus content waiting for you. If you're interested, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we had a lot of people make the jump this week. We have to give their shout outs to, so forgive me if I'm going to rip through them here. We had Slavisa Jessic sign up at the annual tier, got a little bit of a discounted rate monthly for getting a whole year of the show in advance. At the $5 a month tier, we had Avery Fu sign up, Francesco, John White, Oliver. We had Artyom Toplin, who upgraded actually to the annual tier. We had AB sign up. We had Miles B, Callie Farm, Matt Wood, Michael Callis, Beatty Bogan, Sixenek, Ryan Hoyt, Andy Bell, Adam Skorupskis, Sean Byrne, Scott Thompson, Fath Musa, Alec Nelson, Mojito Fiend of 76, Corey Uhl, Jared Walker, James Wilton, Eric LaRoupe, Jordan Macabagal, oh my god, I am so sorry, and Chase Badusniak. I'm very sorry about all of those names, but I appreciate all of you for signing up and hopefully enjoying all of those bonus episodes. We appreciate that support.
Yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
That's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you were listening on either one of those platforms, and I can see the stats, I can see you right now listening on both of those platforms, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners. And last but not least is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for our show, you can get that put on basically anything you guys can think of. And you freaks have thought of a lot of stuff. You have bought notebooks, you have bought pillows, you have bought hoodies, coffee mugs. If you're interested in anything like that, the link is in the description of this episode, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I believe 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks over on the bonus feed would have heard from us, where what would we have been doing, Jamie? We would have been going, why am I taking so long to pull this up right now? This is crazy. No, sorry, because we were on the main feed right now. That's why I got confused. Look at my numbers here. So we were over on, I was thinking we were doing a Patreon episode for a second. No, you got to wait for that over on the Patreon.
That's right.
Over on the main feed,
there.
2 weeks ago, we had special returning guest, critic, and author Jason Bailey join us once again, who had just written a brand new book on James Gandolfini called Gandolfini, Jim Tony, and the Life of a Legend, which inspired us to talk about two 90s John Travolta, James Gandolfini double features where James Gandolfini was kind of in the supporting role, and it's two of maybe his best pre-Sopranos supporting roles he had in 90s movies. Barry Sonnenfeld doing a very effortlessly charming merging of like Hollywood industry satire and Elmore Leonard gangster crime thriller and hangout movie with Get Shorty from 1995. And we paired that with Steven Zalian's procedural courtroom drama, A Civil Action from 1998, which was like a bit of a precursor to something like The Insider or Michael Clayton or Dark Waters, if you like any sort of legal thriller like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's awesome too to watch Travolta and Gandolfini kind of play off each other in those movies. It's a little more sensitive, obviously, with the civil action, but there's some really great humorous moments in Get Shorty between the two that I think are just really charming and just very funny.
Yeah, so if you hadn't heard that episode, that was 2 weeks ago over on the main feed, but then last week over on the Patreon feed when we were talking exclusively to our patrons over there, we were actually doing the patron voted episode, the episode that you guys nominated, you guys upvoted, and you wanted to hear us talk about, which, by the way, usually means that over on the Patreon, when we drop that episode, that's when a new round of voting and the cycle begins again. So everyone over there is deciding on what's coming up in the next round. But for last week, you guys voted for a rest in peace Gene Hackman double feature of The French Connection from 1971, William Friedkin's very brute force, fact-based procedural. And we paired it with Night Moves from 1975, or you guys paired it with Night Moves from 1975, which was Arthur Penn doing a little bit more of a bleak and lethargic sort of Watergate era neo-noir, and Gene Hackman doing two very, very different performances incredibly well.
Oh, yeah. And especially with Night Moves. I mean, I'd never seen that one before. I saw The French Connection, which was great because I got to upgrade it to the 5. That movie's unbelievable. Go check it out if you haven't. But the hangout vibes of Night Moves is pretty unbelievable considering just how incredibly dark that thing gets by the last 30 minutes. So it's a very huge curveball that I think
by the very end of the movie, you'll be like, oh, right, the director of Bonnie and Clyde made this.
Right, exactly.
But the vibe is kind of lackadaisical throughout the rest of it. It's more like, if you like The Long Goodbye, that's maybe closer to what you're actually getting for good portions of it. And then all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, you're just like, oh no, this is upsetting.
The 70s and nihilism, baby. Just a wonderful fusion.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard that episode, again, that was last week over on the Patreon feed. Go back and check that out if you're interested in that. But moving on to this week, we are once again joined by a very special returning guest, author, filmmaker, librarian, video store clerk. He has done it all. Friend of the pod, of course, who likes to show us all matter of extreme Asian cinema and whatever other insanely weird shit he can find out in the wide world of strange movies. That guest is Perry Ruhland. Perry, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be here.
We will always invite you back because always know that we carve out a spot for it in the calendar, and we're always like, Perry's weird corner of what is he gonna show to us. You have earned that spot. You still are responsible for one of the all-time great podcast reviews we've ever received on this show, which was discovered the show, loved it, binged it, got to the Midori episode, and took a break.
Nice. Well, I mean, I'm glad to have helped someone kind of buffer their experience. Enjoy the show a little bit longer.
Holy hell, that's funny.
Yeah. So, and I will always remember that review. And so, Perry, your programming is closely entwined with something that we like to do. We like to dive into the weirdness. So, what are the two movies you have brought with you this week, and why did you pair these two together?
Well, this week I brought two sort of parapsychological thrillers, kind of bizarre new age murder mysteries. They put a question mark on that. Those movies are Angel Dust by Gakuryu Ishii from 1994 and After Last Season by Mark Regin from 2009, which is, I know it's a lot more recent than many movies on this show, but I thought it was an appropriate pairing, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, when you introduced it, you were kind of like, I know that I'm breaking the rules, but I would really like to do this. And we were like,
Yeah.
Perry, you've been on the show enough that we're just like, we will make an exception for Perry. And I will say I was surprised watching it that I was like, I did feel like it felt like some weird underground tape you'd find in the 90s or something like that, despite the fact that it came out in 2009. And I don't know how long they were making that film for, but very, very strange movie. Angel Dust was more, I was like, hey, this is like Japanese sort of psychological horror. There's a crime thriller component. I mean, we'll get into it, but a lot of people compare it to Kiyoshi Kurosawa, who is a favorite on this show. There was a lot of reasons for us to be like, absolutely, let's go for it. And I had not looked into what After Last Season was, and when I eventually looked it up, and the only information you can find about it anywhere is on like bad movie forums and all this, I was like, uh-oh, what is Perry doing to us? But Perry convinced me by saying that I do genuinely like this movie and have, I think, interesting things to say about these two in tandem with each other. And both of them involve psychic connections and serial murder, which is good enough connective tissue for this show as any I can think of.
Yep, there is a ghost sequence in After Last Season, so it belongs on this show.
The amazing ghost sequence in After Last Season. Oh my god.
But that being said, I'm very excited to jump into both of these. So let's kick things off, and let's stick within the realm of what we think the normal listeners of the show will be able to wrap their heads around, and then we will gradually be like, this is how this connects to this other thing that I swear makes sense. So let's start with Angel Dust.
As you take off anytime to show you what you need to live. Tell it to me slowly, tell you why I really wanna know. It's the time. 心を広げて相手を求めるんだ。愛するよ。
All right, we are talking Angel Dust, the 1994 Japanese psychological horror crime thriller written and directed by Gakuryu Ishii, co-written by Yoruzo Ukuta, and starring Kaho Minami as a forensic psychiatrist recruited by Tokyo police to help investigate a serial killer who is committing his crimes once a week on the subway on Mondays, and called the Monday Killer briefly in the film, and possibly could have a personal connection or relationship with her from her past. This is our first time talking about Japanese punk rocker turned filmmaker Gakuryu Ishii, who got his career started making these sort of underground punk shorts and incorporating members of that scene into kind of like a post Mad Max, like biker and very early cyberpunk sci-fi dystopia films, like Crazy Thunder Road and sort of Burst City. Perry, I'm assuming this is a filmmaker you've actually talked to me about for a while, so I'm assuming you're familiar with like the entire catalog there.
Yeah, I haven't kept up with him over the last decade or so, which is on me. I mean, I know he just had a recent adaptation of Kobo Abe's The Boxman that people are divided on, but it seems interesting. But he has a couple distinct phases to his career. As you mentioned at the start, he's making these kind of punk DIY movies. He makes this movie Crazy Thunder Road, I believe, while he's in college, and it gets distributed, which is like crazy. It becomes sort of like a watershed moment for underground Japanese filmmaking. And a lot of people like, Shinya Tsukamoto would be inspired by that moment. But then he steps away from feature filmmaking for a bit. And
I couldn't really find why, but it sounded like he wanted to just like make music videos and concert films, or maybe he felt like the movies, I don't know if he got bored with like the style and let other filmmakers like Shinya Tsukamoto and the sort of underground of sort of like the raw, gritty punk explosion that happened. And he was like, I'll let other people do it. But he took a break for a long time. It was like a decade. It was like 84 to 94 when an Angel Dust is him, kind of coming back. And it looks like really, really changing his style into these more experimental sort of genre bending films, including August in the Water and Labyrinth of Dreams. And I know you're a bit more well versed in his work, because I have a folder for this guy of the few films I've been able to find, and it was literally in brackets Perry recommended. So I don't remember how long ago I made this folder, but I was like, hey, I already have this movie, so I'm I don't have to go hunting for it. And but Perry, maybe as someone who I'm assuming you've seen both sections of his career, do you have any idea what like motivated this change, and could you maybe describe the change for our listeners who aren't familiar?
I mean, I wish I could tell you off the top of the head what it was that motivated the change, but basically his early films, as mentioned, you have a lot of like punk rock, like punk rockers are in the movie. It has this Mad Max kind of biker gang thing. Burst City is kind of his big one. It's one of the early, what would sort of be called Japanese cyberpunk stuff, where like in early volumes of Akira, you have all these bikers in this sort of dystopian environment. And he made this movie called The Crazy Family, which isn't as it's as outrageous as the early movies, but it's not as let's say obviously genre outrageous. It's sort of a satire on the family. And then he's making like music videos for punk industrial bands. He has an amazing concert film for Einstein Neubauten, the German industrial band, that mixes like them playing their homemade instruments in a warehouse being torn down with these like narrative sequences of like a post-apocalyptic cyber war kind of thing.
That sounds
and
sick.
When he changes into his more kind of, I don't know, I consider like a new age period, sort of from 1989 when he does this movie Master Shiatsu, where the cameras is mounted a lot more often. There's not as much like constant kineticism, and there's also this odd, metaphysical new age bent that starts showing up. Master Shiatsu, there's this moment at the end where the heroine looks outside the window and sees Tokyo and sees like ley lines running through it. And there's like these blue beams that start rising from her fingertips. And that sort of sets the tone for a lot of his 90s movies like Angel Dust, August in the Water, his early 2000s movie Mirrored Mind, where he's still expressing a kind of ambivalence with Tokyo and with the speed and violence of Tokyo. But he's now approaching it from sort of what I see as a oppositional perspective, where he's looking for some other way through besides just like going along with that speed and hypercharging it.
Yeah, it seemed like from what I could see of the early stuff, it had more of that like lo-fi, scuzzy, kinetic thing that you were referring to that, again, that you might compare to someone like Shinya Tsukamoto. And then I turned this on and I was like, there's something way more like contemplative and more like dreamy about kind of what it is that he's going. But and maybe nightmarish is a better word of description, where he's very interested in the idea of Tokyo as this, sort of modern, alienated, dwarfing sort of like urban cityscape, essentially. And I was not surprised to learn, for example, when I looked this up, that the production design for this movie, which I think is fantastic, is by a man named Tomoyuki Morio, who would eventually be immediately hired after this movie, I want to point out, by Kiyoshi Kurosawa to do his movies Cure and Pulse. And so you watch this movie and I was like, if you're sort of familiar with that kind of dingy ambiance and that sort of like urban nightmare stuff that you feel like, Kurosawa is doing in his films, especially something like Pulse, there's a lot of sort of similar art house horror stylizing that's going on here. And obviously he's doing a little bit even more with some of the experimental sensory stuff and some of the really crazy sharp like flash cutting he's doing. But if you're interested in the idea of like a horror procedural that directly involves a sort of psychological hypnotic descent, like something like Cure, there's something very similar, I think, being done in terms of the style here, and it's worth noting it's a few years before Kurosawa was doing it, and he hired his production designer to help him achieve it. So I was very intrigued that here was something that kind of came first, and maybe people just don't know about it because it's not as available. I had to watch this on a pretty fuzzy DVD rip because I was not sure at all where to find it, which kind of did help give it some kind of haunted videotape vibes as a movie. But it would have been nice to see what these images were maybe supposed to look like too.
Yeah, the movie looks gorgeous. I mean, there's a certain color palette to it where there are these sickly neon greens and what feels like every interior, and then these really thick orange soupy twilights, and then white surfaces and these pops of red, which becomes very plot relevant. But like there's this great montage going around Tokyo where you see here's a woman in like a red windbreaker, here are red cars on a carousel, here's a red billboard, here's the flashing red of a police siren. It looks amazing, even in this admittedly not gorgeous DVD.
Yeah, there was also the way certain moments of the cityscape and the editing and sound all coming together. And I can't remember the movie name right now, but we covered it, and it was about that kind of revolutionary movie about sound design and corporate, kind of like a corporate overtaking of a city. And I think at a certain point they even use real footage of like a street revolution or whatever it is. But
that's interesting. I can't remember what it is either.
Yeah, it has this
listeners sound off.
Yeah,
we've talked about too many movies on the show.
I know that's the thing. It's like the 300 and something episode. So yeah, but it has this very like it was interesting to me because you said that he comes from kind of a punk background and specifically also a cyberpunk background, and so it just reminded me of that film. And yeah, again, listeners sound off, but just the mixture of it all, it does create a very hypnotic quality, which directly relates to a very specific character in the film. And I love I think it pops up in most of the movie, or at least a couple parts. But there's this in the introduction, this choir synth score that they do.
Yeah,
it's so like it's beautiful, but it's kind of haunting, and it draws you in. It does feel kind of ghostly, and I don't know. Yeah, like haunted, I think would be the word.
Yeah, there's something really moody and very ethereal about the sort of soundscape over the images of the beginning, especially of that Tokyo skyline at night and those shaky sort of point of view shots from the perspective of riding the subway. And Perry mentioned it, but everything with like that green neon kind of fluorescent tinge to it that makes you feel like you're in some weird like subterranean dimension of some kind, while you're watching something that's supposed to be normal. Like everyone is just minding their own business on a normal, crowded sort of Monday commute, which I did find briefly some quotes from him where he was mentioning that part of this was inspired by riding the Tokyo subway after not having been in the country for a number of years and just feeling like there was something off about it, and that was part of the inspiration for this. And that's also where you get the inclusion of the eerie whistling, and then suddenly you get just these moments of you're not exactly sure what's happening, but like a woman gasps and then collapses, and it takes you a little while before you find out that she's being these women are being poisoned through a sort of hypodermic needle or a tiny syringe puncture into the left breast that the coroner describes as like an acute toxication bee sting, and instead that's because it prioritizes mood, and instead of finding out right away that that's what's happening, it takes a couple scenes before you're like, oh, these women are being murdered. Right. Instead, it cuts to this slow zoom inside a dark cave opening where you have like two people, like I guess, exploring this cave and finding a dead body next to like an ice pick, and then hearing a bizarre clanging noise that turns into this just experimental formal frenzy of like camera flash bulbs and distorted faces and like a creepy man standing there and a close-up of a body in the water that then turns into the water of a sort of sensory deprivation chamber. And it's just all of these sort of associative images and mood that he's trying to capture before he's actually telling you what it is that's happening, which is that, there is a serial killer. There's a deliberate work of some sort of serial killer who is going around killing people on Monday commutes. And the passengers literally deem him the Monday killer and speculate, maybe it's a frustrated worker drone, or maybe it's a werewolf, and bodies are just continually piling up. And that pattern is, I guess, only briefly sort of interrupted by the routines when we're introduced to the forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Setsuka Suma, played by, again, Kaho Minami, who specializes in analyzing abnormal criminal personalities, they say, and has a very sort of similarly psychological subjective process to like someone like Will Graham in Manhunter, for example, where she looks at evidence and she looks at tangible things, and she uses it as a way to sort of access the mind of the killer through evidence and sort of an extreme form of, in the case of Will Graham, it's, it's extreme form of empathy. In this case, it's something of almost depicted more as, and I guess you could say it's depicted as that in Will Graham stories too, but like it's depicted as almost like this infection, the killer is infiltrated me, the killer is inside of me, I kind of connect with him a little too much, and we see her recreating the crime scene in her mind as if she were there on the subway and things like that.
Yeah. And it seems like the closer she gets to these things too, it kind of brings her into this past, and which I guess connects to the psychologist slash hypnotizer or whatever, Ku, I believe his name is.
Oh, also, Jamie, I hate to interrupt you, but was the movie you were talking about Decoder?
Yeah, I'm almost certain it was.
That was bothering me, so I was sitting here while I was talking. I was also researching. I was multitasking, and I was like, I'm almost certain.
People check out Decoder. It's like a cyberpunk revolutionary, very low budget film, but it's heavily based on sound design. And it's
friends of the pod, Kurt and Chris brought that on the show, and we paired it with New Rose Hotel, which was like another lo-fi cyberpunk kind of thing.
Yeah, honestly, those are the kind of movies that this was reminding me of. New Rose Hotel included, just because it has a very. It's like the way that it dishes out its plot is very unpurposely scattered and kind of confusing. It's always a little like hypnotic. So I always felt like I wanted to just keep learning more and seeing what was going to be unveiled to me. But it does have that, I don't know if it would be frustrating, but it is a deliberately disorienting film sometimes. But it does seem the closer she seems to get with the ideas of the killer, it seems like it brings her back to this past, which is eventually connected to a man named Ku, which he does this one thing that pops up in the introduction. But I think when she's in the cave, she says Tomo, who is her husband, correct?
Yeah,
correct.
And okay, so what happens though is when he's in the cave, she sees a man, and I think it is Tomo, but he's doing the smile that Aku later uses throughout the film as this almost like a smirk of power and control.
Right.
And it also, we'll get to it, but it ends the film as well in some very like fourth wall breaking way that's kind of cool and creepy as hell as well. But yeah, it's just like all these things kind of accumulate and you get her very subjective experience throughout the film. It feels like it'll dive into the past, it goes back into the present, but it's usually always from Sumo.
Yeah, it does want to recreate the experience, I think, of like, because we'll like the specifics of this is that Suma is jumping on this case around the second or the third victim, and essentially decides to sort of double back and take a look at the first victim named Yumiko, who was the only one stabbed in the back, which to her implies that she may have known the killer, and the killer tried to get behind her rather than confront her in front, and thus she could be the key. And we find out was essentially receiving a sort of religious reverse brainwashing at a Mount Fuji facility called the Refreezing Psychorium, which is a sick name for a facility, run by Suma's former, sort of boyfriend, lover, Dr. Rei Aku, played by Takeshi Wakamatsu, a very incredibly creepy performance, who specializes in, as he puts it, sort of deprogramming mentally ill cult victims or abused cult victims out of this church called the Ultimate Truth Church. But he does so with these sort of radical tactics that many of his colleagues in the psychiatry industry basically call like borderline mind control, like MK Ultra shit. And so as a result, we kind of understand that Suma is someone who maybe did research with him and then parted ways with him and felt like she might have been in a little bit of an abusive relationship with him, where he was essentially trying to psychologically control her. And she kind of, connects these two cases in a way where she thinks that perhaps he's, killing these women, or perhaps, at the very least, one of the women who was killed was someone who was one of his patients at his facility. And so as a result, the movie is kind of stylized or designed in a way to make you feel like you are almost doing a like psychological deprogramming process in the middle of this case with this woman. And that's why it has that kind of liquid style to it, where it feels like suddenly we're changing places, we're changing times, and you never know. And that's why I think the disorientation thing is coming that you were mentioning, Jamie. And yeah, I do think it's incredibly deliberate, and it's incredibly, effective at making you feel like, oh, I'm like waking up out of a hypnotic state, or am I falling deeper into it? And that's kind of maybe one of the central questions of the movie.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One of my favorite transitions was when they're first talking, like the reporters reporting on the murder, and they do this giant full moon transition and then go into this thing about like the werewolf legend for a brief moment. And it just feels like it's, just a simple symbol of like lacking the control, almost waking up and not knowing what you've done or what has happened or why this is the case. And there's a lot of really interesting and cool ways that he does these transitions. We already talked about the smile in the cave, but at the same time when he does that, he also kind of you lose track of Tomo, and then he kind of edits it with flashes of a bulb of electricity, and then back into the smiling, and then back into the electricity, back into the smiling, and then she wakes up in the deprivation tank or whatever it is. So it just it's constantly feeling like it's doing these they are, like I said, disorienting, but they're seamless transitions at the same time.
Right.
And that's really interesting.
It has a real rhythm to it. I mean, it might be a little pat to say like, oh yeah, he made movies for 10 years and came back and he has this great control of rhythm, but there really is this sort of musical editing pattern to it, where scenes will sort of seamlessly dissolve into these transitory montages. I mentioned earlier that montage of red across Tokyo, and that sort of begins when there's a flash of red across Suma's face when she makes a big discovery about the killer. And then that goes into, here's all this red across Tokyo. And then that montage of red across Tokyo takes you into the next scene where she's tracking down what might be the next victim who's wearing red.
Yeah, because you're talking about the part where there's suddenly there's like a blinking flash, like kind of like on her face, right? And then you're wondering, that doesn't make sense. She's in like a bathroom, like where is this light coming from? And then it actually cuts to the siren on the top of the car in the rainy streets of Tokyo, where you're like, oh, we're connecting these two physical spaces, even though that doesn't make any sense. And then it's in losing track of time, and you get these ticking clocks, kind of thrown in there as well. And then that immediately blends into her following that woman in the red dress with the umbrella at the sort of Tokyo Dome, and getting the feeling that she's the next victim, while and doing this sort of this sort of tagging along where she briefly loses sight of her, and the woman does end up collapsing in the middle of the busy street, and she really is starting to question Suma, like whether she's paranoid, or is she becoming one with the killer's perspective and able to kind of trace his gaze and decision making, and even start to be able to pick up on it.
Right. And that's, I mean, I think it's a fair comparison between Suma and like Will Graham, but I think the biggest difference between them is, at least with William Peterson's Will Graham Manhunter, I'm not too familiar with other iterations, he has this horrible mental strain in taking on the killer's personality, or taking on how the killer sees the world, but he still maintains this sort of solid block of Will Graham, where Suma, it's a lot more tenuous. Her identity really sort of dissolves into the identity of the killer. And there's a couple things in the movie where, identities of the character are very liminal. You mentioned, Tomo taking on Aku's traits in the cave. There's a fairly problematic reveal around Tomo later. That I think is sort of a clumsy attempt at going into this idea of like liquid identity. And
there's a bit where Tomo like talks about the Sleeping Beauty being pricked with the needle and then uses an ice pick quite aggressively as well. And there's moments where they're trying to connect the thought process of even her husband to the killer and to her, like they're in this weird sort of incestuous love triangle psychologically that's like blending all of their identities. Like I get what you mean. I mean, like there's one really important scene with Tomo where they're just literally like naked together in like a greenhouse shower with her, where it almost reminds you of the first sequence where her and Aku meet, and it's during this sort of like it's in this sort of forest conversation 2-shot between the two of them where they're talking about her job and about Nietzsche and talking about she's trying to bring up the fact that I haven't spoken to you in like 8 years, and it's funny that we're talking about serial killing because he used to say that there's no such thing as random killing, and she starts to start to build in her mind that there's something to do with the situation is connected to him, even if she doesn't know exactly what. And he says something along the lines too of, speaking of your sort of how connected they become in their mind, great line where he's like, open your mind. It's like dust floating in the air. You disintegrate completely and you're like assimilating with him. They call it sort of an assimilation process.
Yeah.
And that's why there's that like amazing shot of what looks like an outline of a figure between them made out of the motes of dust in a beam of sunlight in the forest. That's something that flows through a lot of Ishii's movies from this era. Like there's bits in August in the Water where it's like Tokyo itself is becoming sick and people are getting, I believe it's called like a stone sickness, where their internal organs are like turning to stone randomly. And these ideas that like the lifeblood or the sort of mentality or mood of Tokyo is intimately linked with the physical bodies of everyone who lives in it. And I think his sort of, as you mentioned, liquid style in this, where he's going between these different reality and fantasy, past and present, all these odd detours into plot, mixed in with the kind of fragmentation and how he films locations. Like, for example, in the opening sequence in the subway, it's all extreme intimate close-ups of different subway riders, like their mouths, their ears, their feet, their hands, and then this really loud Foley on like this person's turning a page in a book, this person's squeezing the leather of the seat. And you get the idea that everything in Tokyo, all the people, all of the buildings, the nature around it, there's a lot of meaningful shots of Mount Fuji, and Mount Fuji plays a really big role in the sort of the central dream, that they're all one big entity, that there's some interconnectedness that runs between everything. And so places and people can influence each other in unusual ways, ways that I guess are not obvious physical interactions.
Yeah, there's there's also moments where they're doing that specifically with Suma's character too, kind of interconnecting the case with her. One of the images that I really enjoyed was they're doing these like hyper flashes over all of the crime scene photos, and as it happens, it just gets like faster and faster, and then it kind of cuts to a shot of the projector, and you can just see her shadow overtaking it, like completely blocking the image, like she's almost like merging with it or something like that.
Yeah, they do it twice. They do it during the crime scene photos and also during that scene of them flipping through the second victim's art slideshow, where it feels like she's trying to connect with the victim a little bit, which is a huge part of it, where she thinks that Suma is maybe could be the next victim, or could be, really sensing what's going on here, because she's like, these women are not literally connected or related to each other. Like, they're not friends, they're not family. I can't really distinguish what the pattern is beyond the fact that they all have some sort of sensation or feeling of alienation and maybe some sort of suicidal depression that she ends up, I think, referring to a strong sense of isolation and destruction, kind of more broadly, that's subconsciously linking the girls, even if they aren't sort of literally connected, which leads to a very funny line where one of the sort of male detectives is like, okay, let's make an announcement that young women with feelings of isolation and self-destruction must not ride the trains on Mondays. That should do it.
That's so funny. Another thing that's really good about the filmmaking for connecting to the it's like the Tokyo itself there's at least seemingly it feels like there's a lot of almost like guerrilla filmmaking when they're amongst a ton of people that maybe are unaware that they're being filmed, or they just had that many extras for these scenes. I have no idea. Maybe it was a full-scale production in that sense. But a lot of it, especially when it comes to the street stuff, like when they're doing full-scale, like people are collapsing within the narrative, but it feels like there's 1,000 people around them that have no idea what's going on. I think whether that's actual guerrilla filmmaking or not, it really does give an effect of that. And it's kind of like they're just working within the city. Again, it's very alive kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, it kind of switches between those more sort of like chaotic on the fly images of Tokyo and these more kind of still and precise, really, really well production designed moments of, whether it's a mundane sort of fluorescent office or it's like a steel sort of morgue slab, or it's, finding ways to translate the alienating Tokyo skyscrapers filmed in wide angle lenses and trying to find it inside, even the way that they shoot that forest conversation where it's done in this sort of there's a very sort of Cure-esque moment, for example, where it breaks up one of the wide sort of master two shots of them seated at each other, looking at each other. And it just cuts to Aku lighting his cigarette in this very sort of like hypnotic way, and it catches her attention, and she even like grabs the lighter, and I was sitting there going, man, this is exactly like here. And it's also there's a part where he taps his fingers like on his leg at a certain point too, in this very kind of hypnotic way, and it's habits that we actually watch her pick up on herself, and it's not commented on, but like later at home she starts smoking and like tapping her hands, and it's just weird sort of little just highlighted behavioral moments that really stand out because of the stillness and because of the placement and the blocking in the frame, and these more controlled moments where it's not just trying to get you into the sort of eerie chaos of running around Tokyo.
Yeah, right. What's really interesting too is they'll have these and I don't think that they're out of place at all, but there's these subtle moments that almost have this this stylish factor, this almost cool factor, like when there's one part where she's looking in the mirror and starts to say like she feels as if the killer is inside her, and then they start to do this cool thing where almost like a hip-hop kind of esque beat hits, and she looks at herself in the mirror and then puts on these sick ass shades, and I'm just like, we're like transitioning to something else here for a moment, but it never feels out of place. It still feels kind of like within her own subjective experience of getting closer to this case and everything else. But I love that.
the movie has great surfaces. I mean, her clothes, she always looks so fashionable, like she is a style icon. But like all the greenhouse and its weird sort of bare geometry, how many interiors are like these big kind of liminal spaces where you have checkerboard tiles and then not many desks and maybe a few green plants here and there. There's the bit where
I love that long shot of that guy carrying a fake plant the entire way up.
It's amazing. There's the bit where she goes to the Ultimate Truth Church's headquarters, and they have in their courtyard what looks like foible blocks or something, like those little wooden basic geometry shapes, but blown up into these big white spheres. It's like giant white spheres and
you sent it to us. That shot of the guy holding the sphere in like the middle of their, just like the front of their building.
Yeah, it looks nuts. It's great. It's such a cool looking movie, which is definitely,
and all those shots of the people just watching her like completely still, like while that haunting sort of like experimental soundscape sort of starts to creep in, and she's just like, damn, maybe these people are all fucking in a crazy cult and are terrifying.
Right. And a bit in that scene I love is she's talking to them, and they're talking about how, hey, Aku's a bad guy. I mean, we treat members in here like family, and he, he's really abusive in his attempts to, what they consider brainwash the members of the new religion. And while they're talking, she gets a call from Aku, and she picks up the phone and is trying to act like there's kind of nothing going on and leaves the room to go talk to him. But because all the walls in the room are glass, it looks like she's still there. Like the people are still just behind her looking at her while she's having this private conversation with the last person she should be talking to. Very nice touch.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like, honestly, there's a hostility to the city, that you are never safe, no matter no matter where you are. And if anything, it feels like the containment, or the claustrophobic containment of the killing to the subways, is like kind of one thing she latches onto. And she actually, there's moments of her just going to there and trying to see if she can spot the killer. And partway through the movie, they open it up to being like, the killings are continuing, but they're not just on the crowded subways anymore. And it's where the movie becomes a little bit more unpredictable as to exactly, because it's like, oh, it's widened out. There wasn't rules to this. And the sequence where they establish that, I think, is one of the scariest in the whole movie, which is where we get a sequence of someone just walking by a late night laundromat. And a woman basically just stares at a machine through the sort of exterior, through the glass, until she sees a hand whirling around inside, because she's been watching long enough. And you're not sure if she just hallucinated that or if there's literally a corpse in there. The whistling from the subway kind of comes back in, that the killer does. And as the way that it frames this, it's done in this very Pulse-like way. It reminded me of all the scary ghost sequences in Pulse, where it's just a wide shot of the woman being like, I think the thing whistling behind me could be the killer, and I think it is literally right there, and I'm going to slowly turn. And the slower I go, the less likely I am to be harmed, or I'm going to see it, or whatever. Who knows? Like, everyone kind of thinks that way when you're in a dark space. You're just like, whatever. But the way that it's framed, of her just slowly turning, and the camera, as her body gets thinner because she's turning, we can start to see that there is a guy standing right behind her. And it doesn't show us the rest of it. That's just it. And you're just like, she's turning, and it cuts, and you're like, oh, she's dead.
And the cut is so crazy because it gets rid of all the sound, and it just cuts to a quiet crime scene. So it's just them like repeating the same thing that we've been seeing. Oh, another person's dead. And they don't even do the, like, oh, well, she was murdered here and blah, blah, blah. It's just quiet, and you see them working, but it's like, what happened. Isn't this just sad that it keeps piling on? I think that edit is really perfect.
This edit you're talking about is sort of an exception, but something I also love about the other edits after the murders is there's this sort of elliptical transition where a crime is just about to be committed, and then it will cut to like a TV report recapping the crime being committed. And there's all these strange cuts between like the events of reality, what have you, and then media with TV reports and papers or the slideshows. And it works in an interesting way where you get to eventually in the third act, you find that Aku's brainwashing happens sort of like a weird media prison where there's like a television that's constantly talking to you. And
that's a fantastic introduction when they do that. When Aku really is starting to think that all of these psychological games at play reek of his radical tactics that she understood because she was there during his research process for them before he went solo. And every sign of this case is pointing to, if not him literally being the killer, at least the one with the ability to get inside these women's minds and maybe make them feel the way that they feel or control them in some way. And obviously he personally knew one of the victims. He has a similar theory to her about the isolation and destruction sort of thing. I think she confronts him too about like a color blindness thing, which is part of her thinking about the idea of the sort of the attraction to some of the outfits. And the only thing really dissuading her that has anything to do with him is just the lack of motive, which is something that he tries to exploit. But she, says, I can't explain it with common logic, as she puts it. But I do think this has something to do with the, experimenting with what you can do with psychiatry. And, he starts to say that she's just having deranged fits of fantasy and can't possibly convince anyone of this. And it's followed immediately by the scene that you were just referring to, which is him watching those creepy videotapes of one of his deprogramming sessions, which is done in this very kind of shaky, staticky haze. And it's him asking one of the girls questions about this truth and the high priest and the god who helps her be reborn and sort of re-resurrected, and essentially bluntly yelling at her in a way that's probably not particularly effective, that, you know, your church is phony and that you've been brainwashed and they're the ones who have made you feel completely alone. And, you know, it's sort of suggested that, you know, they're taking advantage of these horrible traumatic incidents. And maybe this girl had she describes a moment with, you know, her mother, that her mother died and she felt like she could have saved her, but she was stung by a bee. And that's a moment where you're like, oh, stung by a bee. The coroner compared the syringe attacks to like a bee sting. And all of a sudden you're starting to connect these things together. And it's just leading you deeper into thinking that Aku is involved with this. But yeah, the idea, the production design of that room that he like keeps them in, where there's just like this VHS sort of like, you know, static tube TV and like a bed and just an incredibly low lit room. It's very creepy.
With him smiling at you just for hours.
Yeah, and the way it's lit is like gray floor, black walls and darkness, and then just the glow of like TV static, and then sort of the video of him, which is like greenish monochrome. It looks amazing, very scary.
Mm-hmm.
Not to backtrack too much, but something I love about the trains and the caves and stuff, this idea of like, you have, again, it's a movie with great surfaces. You have the weird geometries and the great costumes, and then you have all this stuff of here's Tokyo in aggregate, but then you have all these weird spaces, these, you know, dark caves. The first real scene in the movie, or sorry, not the first scene in the movie, but the scene that has like the title drop over it, is a slow zoom into a dark cave, and then, you know, that room where he's doing the sort of re-brainwashing is like this cavernous space, and there's murders start on subways. You get the idea of like, you have the overworld where the logical plot events happen, and then you have the underworld, which is sort of the dreamy, weird horror areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, friend of the pod, actually, the horror author Mike Thorne pointed out in one of his write-ups about the film that it's very Jungian imagery, in the sense of that he wrote a lot about sort of water and caves as symbolic of, you know, retreating into the sort of dark, unconscious parts of your mind and stuff like that. And I think the imagery is deployed sort of similarly in as a contrast. But yeah, I do like your point too about it being like everything is also connected, that you get these modern shots of the city, but you also get something like a cave, and it's like Tokyo is, you know, does feel like this massive claustrophobic space, and you get like moments of, you know, that the revelation of the tapes is cross-cut with that sequence of Suma like slow motion walking through the crowded green fluorescent subway on the prowl with the killer, and imagining Aku like walking towards her like as the killer, and collapses like one of the victims, but not due to stabbing, just to like psychological stress. And again, that's sort of the, you know, sort of the style tricks at play here, to be like all of a sudden his deprogramming room that feels like this weird, just like monochrome TV static cave is directly connected to the space where the murders are happening, and she's living it. She feels like she's living it out psychologically. And, you know, when he's the one who calls her right when she wakes up after her stay in the hospital after collapsing, and, you know, despite wanting to kind of refuse him and hang up, he kind of makes her once again believe that she is just completely under his control, like in an abusive relationship. And despite being in sort of distressed denial about how much power he maybe still wields over her, she ends up driving to his facility and going into that space. And that's a crazy sequence too, where she's walking. Mm-hmm. We've just been introduced to what the space is used for, and here is a character who we think is getting pretty psychologically unhinged as the movie is going on, walking directly into where we know what it was he does with that. And it starts with with her moving through the pitch black corridor, following just these eerie footsteps on the way there, goes into this sort of this reverse brainwashing room, as they call it. And again, it's symmetrical sort of low light shots of like a TV screen in the middle of the room with his face on it. He's speaking to her through the TV, like on the videotape, which reminded me of we just talked about it a couple weeks ago with Morgan, but Arabetto, when he goes into that film world and he's talking to the filmmaker, and the filmmaker becomes him, and all this kind of stuff. And that connection is happening between the two characters because, he's speaking to her on the videotape and mocking the idea of him forcing her to do anything in a great moment where he's like, look, you can just refuse to watch this tape or listen to this tape. Like, you have free will. And there's even a moment where she covers her ears and the sound design disappears and she can't hear him speak. And then she's screaming and flailing around the room and wanting to continue to listen, smashing shit. He's got a big smirk on his face, and, her just like begging him to, be honest and confess that, that she's not going crazy, that she's involved in this, and maybe she's doing all of this killing as a punishment for her leaving him or something. Like, she's looking for something kind of logical here, and eventually just admits, like, okay, you got me. I'm your captive. I'm back in your psychological trap. I want to, please just like set me free. And she ends up seeing the girl from the reverse brainwashing tape, walk into the room, and you weren't sure before if she was like maybe one of the victims who died or something, but in that moment it kind of feels like a very ghostly interaction that she has, which is why it results in her like ripping out of the facility back home in her car, almost Lost Highway style, ripping down the fucking road, and eventually discovering her husband, who had left a note for her when she woke up from the hospital saying, take your meds and just stay home. And instead she decided to go see her ex at his crazy brainwashing facility and comes back and he's just dead on the floor.
Yeah.
What you just explained is fucking insane, but it's great.
Yeah. No, but and the craziest part is it really doesn't like explain all of this to you. You just it is just a sensory experience that you go through with the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which I think too, like when we were talking about it jumping back and forth too from like the newsreels to the subjective thing, it's very interesting just because you have that perspective that only flashes for every time that like there's a murder or something, that almost you view, because it's the news reporting it, that it's supposed to be this like objective truth or whatever. But then everything else that we see within the movie, because of how disorienting it is and how like there's this kind of course hypnotic quality to it, you're just constantly questioning what you're being told at the same time. And so I think that really does a cool contrast going back and forth. And then with this one, using the television itself as kind of this sense of control, or at least like he's watching over her the entire time and mocking her with it as well, is really, really interesting. And and then like, to be honest, when it started to get to all this, like the girl coming in with the ice pick and that being revealed, I was still in the sense of like, am I in some bad dream? Because it just feels so strange and larger than life, and well, because it's interesting because on a very technical level, the ending to this movie is like a lot more literal and explainable than like something like Cure, which to me has like, I think, a bit more, I don't know, you get to the end of that and there's something ancient and unknowable and like a supernatural transference that's taking place, because Kurosawa feels like he's diagnosing the idea of like a primordial evil spreading through time and still connected with the modern world in some kind of way. And I had a feeling that this was going to do something similar, and that this was going to be a little bit more supernatural than ends up being. I guess you could argue the psychiatry tactics that this man uses on some level feels quite supernatural, or feels like a bit of a possession movie. I could see how some people could draw a connection between this and Ringu as well, if you want. But it doesn't feel that way, which is what's kind of interesting about the sequence. Because I totally agree with you that like when she ends up convinced that, Tomu's murder and that sort of Aku, and by extension her, as sort of a vessel of his, maybe in some way is perhaps, responsible for the murders, if not literally committing the murders. And she wakes up in his facility again and tries to stab him as he approaches her.
with a needle, and instead they end up sort of grabbing each other in this almost sort of like quasi scary, quasi romantic sort of slow motion, which is interrupted by the lights turning on, this girl entering and claiming that Aku's sort of reverse brainwashing turned her into a killer, and she was the girl who had the story about being stung by a bee, and she's been going around killing women with a needle. And it's like, oh, that's pretty easy psychological diagnosis. The bee sting girl has been bee stinging people to death on the subway. And that, so it's quite literal in that way, but it does have this scary transference thing that's happening because she's, slowly walking towards Aku and Suma with the needle, with both an ice pick, but also a needle ring, also grappling with him. And until essentially he stops her and tells her that, she liked killing and that she's reliving her childhood drama, but it's doing it in this way that's really interesting, where he's talking, but like her childhood voice is like coming out of his mouth. And it sort of comes to the conclusion that he invented this backstory to sort of motivate her to kill, or at the very least he felt she had this ability deep within her, and he kind of unlocked it and kind of convinced her to do it, and manages to like convince her to kill herself right in front of Suma. Like Suma's watching all of this and like seeing in action how he is able to control this sort of unstable girl to do what it is that he wants her to do, and was just finding a way to, like, I guess, psychologically grasp onto her death wish and sort of push it in other directions, which is then obviously, part of the scary ending of the movie, that Suma sees all of that quite literally take place in front of her, and she essentially goes home with him. She's reunited back with him. He's eliminated her husband, and now he has her back. And these two crazy psychiatrist colleagues are about to go unleash whatever power they've learned here on the world, you assume.
Yeah.
Right.
And like, I feel a very well-earned fourth wall break, to be honest. I was like super scared of that smile at that point. He's just looking right at you.
The shot of Mount Fuji with the cop cars and all of the cops showing up to be like, well, case solved. We found the girl who literally murdered all these people, even though that's not like actually
really what it was.
What happened here is, like, that's obviously incredibly scary. Also, fantastic credits cut to Times of the Season by the Zombies, which was just not a credit song I expected to hear in like a 90s Japanese horror movie.
Yeah. And it is go ahead, Perry.
Sorry, I wanted to say on the bit where I believe her name's V, the killer, shows up, and sort of they have like the Psycho ending, basically, or the ending that's in every giallo, where a guy comes in and is like, oh, the killer did this for this, and this reason, which usually feels like it takes from the mystery of the movie. But because it gets so weird beforehand, and the Psycho style explanation really doesn't answer everything, like it literally tells you who was killing, but as you said, afterwards you still see Mount Fuji, which for the whole movie has just been this weird looming symbol of death over the cop cars, and you get the feeling like there's intentionally something left out, or this strange explanation is not meant to fit perfectly. I mean, that might just be me re-loving the movie, but that's how I read it.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's showing the I don't know if I get the expression right, but it's like it shows the disease but not the symptom, if that makes any sense. Like they know what happened, in the sense that here's physically who murdered these people, but that is not the issue at hand. That is not where it came from. That's not where the evil actually underlies, and so really the problem isn't going to be fixed whatsoever. And then him smirking right at you, knowing that this evil is going to last and completely just keep going, I guess, is very terrifying and has this haunting feeling at the end. And yeah, I think it's one of those films that really doesn't let up, honestly. It feels like you think maybe she's going to find some type of answer, or some type of, even if it's helping the next victim. But if anything, it just shows the cycle is going to continue. And now the one person that was kind of fighting against it is now locked in with Aku. So it's, it feels hopeless in a way.
Right.
Yeah. Terrifying stuff.
Yeah, no, I like this a lot. And if we're pivoting towards the reductive rating round, this was a very solid to maybe even strong 4. I think for me, I think it was it made me definitely want to explore more of Ishii's work and kind of trace this transition he went through from like this, sort of like scuzzy do it yourself sort of like punk rocker to this more sort of atmospheric, experimental, almost like art house psychological horror form. It seems like he kind of took on here. And I do think that this is just again, if you're someone who is really into this kind of spooky and stylized sort of like Japanese horror, but you also like a procedural that has the this mystery and this sort of sensory quality to it. Like if you're someone who's really big on Cure and Pulse, this is the same production designer, and it is doing stuff slightly differently. I mean, you could just say, well, it's a serial killer movie where the killer on some level is a hypnotist who mind controls people, and you could be like, okay, yeah, that's pretty Cure. But there is enough here going through the sort of like punk rock sort of the rhythms and the liquid quality of it, and the parts where he will break from stillness to get into the more sort of guerrilla stylizing of running around the city, and get into the brainwashing components of the flash editing and the almost like strobe editing effects through the association editing, and the haunting ambient soundscape stuff. Like there's so much to like about what it is that he's doing here, and it really does make for a really sort of unsettling and haunting, sort of cryptically drawn out experience where the modern alienation of Tokyo spaces to become this kind of shadowy, collective, unconscious death wish dreamscape type thing. And I think that's all through just the style and the filmmaking. And I think that's considering this was his first time at bat with doing something like this after taking practically a decades long break from filmmaking, was just incredibly impressive to me. But also, yeah, it just also works as a plain movie about a behavioral analyst just trying to find out who the hell is killing all these ladies on the subway on Mondays. That's a strange case to take on. And so like if you're interested on that kind of genre level, this movie delivers. Yeah, you're also just gonna feel a little bit sensory deprivation brainwashed yourself a little bit as it gets more into the slow burn psychic assimilation quality that you sort of unites the killer and the victim, and yeah, ends in a incredibly dark and haunting place. So very solid 4 for me.
Yeah, me too.
Blu-ray, put out a Blu-ray for God's sakes.
Please do that. Yeah, right now you can only find it on like Internet Archive and get it maybe like a DVD rip or something like that. So it's very difficult to get or I guess it's impossible. I don't think anything exists. So yeah, please do that.
Doesn't exist yet. Someone should do it.
But yeah, I think the direction is incredible. Ishii, the way that he especially captures the cityscape, I think is so amazing. And the way that he does transitions into this, like the constant feeling that there is this hypnotic quality to the film and that it seems seamless, even if it is very disorienting, is, I think, it's what he does strongest. And I don't think it would work. Like if it had that disorienting feeling, but there was more of a kind of jagged feeling to the rhythm, I don't think it would work. That you have to go seamlessly into each thing, maybe confused, but it just feels like you've been taken there. And I think he does a great job of that. And yeah, I think the score is very cool, especially that thing I mentioned at the beginning, that choir synth score specifically, I thought was amazing. Yeah, there's just anything to do with like, that's why I love Cure and Pulse too. It's like the lack of control, something that's so much bigger than us, and it just feels like you're being pulled into it, is terrifying. And I think it does a really good job of getting more subjective as it goes. Until the point where you almost think the ending is going to have some type of answer. And I guess it does have like an objective answer, but it just feels still like nothing is resolved really. They may get the murderer, but not really, they don't really get the underlying symptoms. So it's, that's a terrifying thought. And the, also kind of interesting is like they don't spend a ton of time saying anything about it, which I think is smart, but there's an obvious power dynamic where he's a psychologist and seems to be established and using his knowledge and position in order to take advantage of people. So there's definitely that quality as well. And that kind of lines up with him getting her back into an abusive relationship. So yeah, there's a lot of haunting things here, but it's very, very good. So check it out. Angel Dust, 4 out of 5.
I'm also going to give it a strong 4. All of his movies after his return, or at least the ones I've seen, there's something to them where I watch them a lot. I mean, this is my second time watching Angel Dust, but usually every summer I'll watch August in the Water from around the same time, and I've seen Mirrored Mind a bunch, and there's something to them where I feel like I get them less than most genre movies. I don't know how to explain them. I think there's a lot of pieces that I can identify as like pieces of a puzzle, but I'm not quite sure how they add up, and it gives me a very, I don't know, it's a productive feeling. I like wrestling with his movies, and I like the strange sort of rock in my gut this one gives me. I mean, it's just, it is so dreadful. You talked about the scene in the laundromat earlier, and just talking about it made me feel kind of knotted. So yeah, I love this movie. There's something to it that's out of my reach, and I hope to keep watching it more. And maybe someday
You'll get to the bottom of it. I believe in you.
I mean, it's about the journey, right?
It's a trick. He wants you to watch it over and over again. That's what that smile at the end is. By the 10th time, he's got you, you know?
I'd love to. And I'll say that another one of his 90s movies, Labyrinth of Dreams, is also sort of an elliptical murder mystery with serial killers and trains.
Very cool.
Sold.
Like both of those things.
Exactly.
In movies, in particular, the first one.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up here for Angel Dust. We're going to be right back, and you will want to stick around because we are going to be talking about a movie that is of similarly skilled filmmaking craft after last season. Stick around.
The technology
There's some kind of ornament on the door.
may help the students see who is behind the murders.
Where is she?
She's in a room. It appears to be very small.
Haley?
Yeah, there's someone else inside the room.
Mike? Is that you? If you can see a murder before it happens, we can do something about the next one.
What can I do?
After last season.
All right. We are back, and we are talking After Last Season, the 2009 science fiction quasi-drama, quasi-horror thriller, psychological experience written and directed and produced and shot by a mysterious indie director by the name of Mark Regan, and starring two actors I'm going to name, even though I'm sure no one will know who they are, Jason Kulas and Peggy McClellan, as two neurology students, Matthew and Sarah, who use experimental chips that allow them to visualize events outside of their own sort of bodies and minds, or to go inside her brain in hopes of catching a killer that is killing people around the city, but also at their school. And, I guess hopefully discover information that will lead to the capture of him, kind of like Minority Report style. But that description of the movie, I don't think quite captures what it is that you're experiencing when you watch this movie. This is our first, and I assume last time, talking about this mysterious indie director who there is just very little information about online outside of various Reddit threads and epic bad movie forums where people speculate about everything from the fact that he is involved in some sort of money laundering scheme where he took investors' money and claims to have spent $5 million on the film, but it doesn't quite look like $5 million was spent on the film.
Josh,
I could not fucking. I was like, whoa.
Josh, it's $4.9 million in the special effects.
That's
right. That is partially his claim here. So
that are almost as good as Disclosure, the 1990s film starring.
They get fairly close, and so you'll find people claiming that. to people recounting its 2009 sort of bizarre sort of marketing where they just uploaded the trailer to sort of like Apple Movies or whatever. If anyone remembers back when you used to get your trailers from there, and people not at all sure like what it was that they were looking at. They were like, was it like a fake prank movie? Some people speculated that it was for some reason a prank movie by Spike Jonze, which I couldn't find any further details about, except for the fact that some people just thought that. There were many stories about it having horrendously bad theatrical reactions to the people who were curious to based on the bizarre trailer, and the trailer that called it like one of the most special like thrillers of the year or something like that. And it only played, I guess, in 3 or 4 movie theaters, despite the fact that Regent says he wanted it to have a wide release and originally intended it to have a wide release. The few theaters that played it for, it sounds like 1 or 2 days before they basically decided to send the prints back to the distribution company, to which the distribution company said, shred and burn those prints instead, because we don't want to pay to have them shipped back to us. So that is the main story of this movie. No one knows really who this guy is or where to find him to ask more details about this film. You can't even really find photos. I mean, yeah, the only semblance of his online existence was like review bombing the IMDb positive reviews with like fake accounts, and also, a 2009 interview that he gave to Filmmaker magazine, which I think was one of the few things that sort of clarified to me what it was that was going on here, because the writer of the article themselves was caught up in this sort of bizarre cult phenomenon that it received in sort of online movie forum communities after the trailer dropped, where they were all sort of confounded by the mysteriousness of just this assortment of random clips of a no budget sci-fi film. They could not figure out if it was a real movie or not. And while, the writing of the article became a bit obsessed, and essentially was able to hunt him down and do a phone call interview, which is really the only place that you can get his perspective. And he does drop some facts about like the fact that he was a real, like, it's very funny when you read it. You'll, if you go and find this in Filmmaker magazine, it's they've put it online. It's a fantastic read, because part of the tone of the interview sounds like the interviewer is in disbelief and like trying to get him to explain like, who paid for this?
Right.
How many crew members did you have?
But without insulting.
like legitimately trying to understand the basic facts of where this thing came from. And we learn a little bit that he was a real estate business manager from Massachusetts. He was a film fan who describes that himself as having seen probably all the movies that people have seen, which I was trying to figure out exactly what he meant by that.
He means the top 100 most popular on Letterboxd.
Dumb and Dumber, The Exorcist, Sixth Sense.
Yeah. He does say he was inspired by The Sixth Sense and The Exorcist, even though that wasn't exactly what the film was covering, the same subjects. His description of the subjects the film covers, if you wanted to know, scientific innovation, 1, how it can be used to solve murder, 2, showing some facets in the lives of medical students is another thing.
It's lifestyle, spice of life.
And that's it. That's mostly what the movie is to him, was partially about. And to him, and the interviewer pressures him on this even, he says, to him, it is a very logical and realistic movie. And the interviewer tries to kind of get him to be like, have you seen any responses to the film? And people kind of being confused about the film. Were you trying to make it seem convoluted or unreal in some capacity? Like, were you making a strange art movie? No, he 100% says that he was making a thriller. And the critics, as he says, would say it better than I do. It's a film unlike anything you've seen before, and that is something we tried to do. And he actually at one point just cites a bunch of the few positive reviews he found in like an online Facebook group in 2009, where he quotes people saying, my mind has melted out of my ears. I will probably see it again. I just got back from seeing it. It's amazing. If you can see it, do it. I've seen it twice today. Yeah. So
Incredible.
anyway, Perry, before we get into all the craziness there, explain to us your first watch of After last season. Did someone show this to you, or were you scrolling the internet?
Someone showed it to me. My good friend Evan, who watches many more strange movies than I do.
Is this Evan Pincus on
Yes,
Letterboxd?
yes.
Okay, good note. I wrote down his review specifically for this movie because I thought it was fantastic, where he described it either the single most outsider piece of outsider art out there, or the single most effective effort to obliterate cinematic grammar that the world has ever seen. I doubt I'll ever know which it is without talking to Regent himself, but either way, deserves to be celebrated, not derided, which is, one of the rare positive reviews you'll find for the film online. Even though I do think people describing the movie negatively and positively, their reviews are quite similar. It's just whether everyone, I think, is assessing what the movie functionally is. It's just whether you think that this is a horrific disaster accident, or whether you think that this is one of the most unique pieces of art that's ever been made. And, in some cases, two things can be true, or one more true than the other.
Right. Yeah. Evan, early shooter for this movie. He watched it in 2019. But he loves it.
He had like 5 reviews for this movie, so I could not avoid his reviews.
He's seen it a bunch. I remember one time we both used to live in Los Angeles. I mean, he still lives in Los Angeles, but I don't anymore. But when we lived in Los Angeles, we went to the old Amoeba Music location one time, and he found one of the 100 printed DVDs of the movie in a $1 bargain bin.
Wow.
And
it's like finding the golden ticket.
Absolutely. Yeah. A couple years later, he showed it to myself and my fiance, and we adored it. We were just head over heels in love. Immediately afterwards, we then showed it to an unnamed Sleazoids guest, who we got very high to watch it, and he had a reaction where he couldn't tell if he liked it or not, but he was very scared. And there's a shot early on of a hallway, and he said, "Oh my God, I feel like there's something in the movie. I feel like there's something watching me in that hallway." And then, what do you know? 45 minutes later, you learn there's something that was in that hallway. And since then, I've definitely been locked in as like, no, this is real stuff. This is great cinema.
Yes, you are not of the mind of, if you were to scroll the various IMDb reviews where people are just going on about, bad movie, it's another The Room, or it's another Troll 2, it's another some of the titles for these reviews, some of them got funny after a while, where I was just like, people were some variation on the worst film I've ever seen, or worse than you can imagine. One review title was just called Purgatory, and I was like,
nice,
that's a little accurate, actually.
Yeah, that is true.
It feels like you're in limbo.
There's a Letterboxd review that's like a half star. This has like a 1.5 on Letterboxd, I think. There's a review where someone's like, "If you unironically think this movie is deep and smart, I hate you."
There was another one I read that was what people who hate David Lynch see when they watch his films, and I felt like that probably does sort of encapsulate some of it, because if you look up half-star reviews of Inland Empire, I feel like it would probably be similar to the half-star reviews of this film in some way. But I will say, as someone just attuned to the David Lynch style already, there was something to me where I was kind of just like, I immediately dropped right into the vibe. And this one, it did take me a little bit to be like, what exactly is going on here?
Right.
Because I will say, it has what should be a fairly simple premise by our standards on this show, where I was like, oh yeah, there's two, even if you're talking about low production value outsider art, we've talked about that a lot on the show. There's tons of films that we've talked about where some guy had a lo-fi camera and $5,000 and was like, I'm going to reach above the ambitions of what it is that I actually have here. And I'm going to tell a story about, through pure surreal subjective filmmaking, I'm going to get over the limitations and capture this idea of, like, again, the basic premise of two students who put these chips into their heads that they can then feel like they are kind of having a psychic vision quest experience collectively, where they are seeing visions or premonitions of a killer, and then hopefully using that to maybe at some point prevent killings from happening. And I just think that that's like a fairly juicy premise, to be honest. Like, that is something that you could very easily turn into something that is less baffling and less convoluted in terms of the filmmaking, that has an interesting effect on the movie, simply because it really does seem like this filmmaker isn't quite sure how to contain or like structure that narrative, or like convey basic conversations between characters. Like, there were a lot of times watching this movie where I did have to kind of like go back a little bit, and I was like, am I sure who these people are and what it is that they're having a conversation about, how they're related to each other, what space or room they are in, how much time is passing, everything. I was like, it swaps between being bland looking to being incredibly frighteningly cryptic looking. There are a lot of meandering telephone conversations that are unrelated to things happening in the film at times. In other times, they're delivering exposition, but they're delivering it to a character off screen who you don't know who they are or why it is that they should be being delivered this information. And there's a lot of things I think you could very easily interpret as ineptitude. And it's very possible a lot of those things are ineptitude. There are qualities, though, I will say, while watching it, where I went, this is the most surreal and unreal thing I've ever witnessed. And I don't know if I was stoned enough to be like, this is terrifying me, but I was like, something is being communicated from one brain to another brain, and I'm not sure what it is. And I'm a little perturbed by that. And in fairness, it's partially the subject of the movie. People are going into other people's brains and seeing visions of them, and it's being drawn in ways that are completely confounding. And I will say I did find the experience incredibly unique.
Yes. I want to say, before we start going into like the plot and events of the events, probably a better term for it, the events of the movie. I really am unable to decipher if it is like something made intentionally or not. And I think I'm at a point where I take it for what it is. If all these choices were made intentionally, if they're made accidentally, the choices were made, and it's the only approach to this material that could have this effect. And I honestly,
it absolutely
think that,
is what it is.
Yes. And whatever reason the decisions were made, a more traditional approach to the material would not create this effect. It would not hum like this, because there are segments of the movie that are, as perturbing is a good word for it. I mean, it touches on something not a lot of movies get at. There's just some weird discomfort with it. You mentioned not being able to tell where you are. The movie seems to have two filming locations, which are someone's like suburban house with all the furniture taken out of it, or like a warehouse. And these filming locations stand in for medical centers, research stations, colleges, a dorm, an apartment complex. When they are they're not particularly disguised as them. They're interchangeable, like the medical office and
the production designer of Cure did not work on this movie.
It's more like when Ed Wood would do a sign and be like doctor's office, police station, slap a piece of paper on a wall and be like, now you know where we're at. Here's a desk. have the conversation.
But
you know what?
less
Even
than
more
that
so than Ed
because-
Wood, though, because I would say that, like, yeah, like it feels like because they will do that and they will say we're at this corporation and this is the production design for it. But it's also like we want to cover up the fact that there's like wallpaper in this guest house and like grandma's house or whoever's house we're shooting it in.
Right.
So we're gonna tape like photocopier paper just along the tops of the wall, but we're not gonna do anything else to the wall. So it's
Right.
just a pink wall with papers along the tops of it, which is something that like Ed Wood wouldn't do. Because like it has a similar sort of like just like do it yourself, like, you know, production design for sure. But it's done in a way that makes less sense. It doesn't actually look like the thing it's even trying. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
Right. And there isn't like a sign that says, welcome to the doctor's office. I mean, the closest thing you get is there's literally one place where there's a printed out piece of paper that says psychological test taped to a door. But besides that, it's like, yeah, you're in what could be a living room at your grandparents' house. That really is the vibe because there's this, even though it's supposed to be a medical office with the walls covered with colored paper, there is a giant like fan with these sort of crystalline looking light fixtures on it that is very obviously suburban home. And, you know, they're not trying to cover it up or anything. They don't put a sheet on it. They just let it
Not
be
only
there.
are they not trying to cover it up, at one point they use a close-up of that fan as a scene transition, just a freeze frame of it. And I was like, okay, they're definitely not trying to hide the fact that this doctor's office that apparently has an MRI made of cardboard and tissue paper in it is just clearly in someone's house. Right.
And that's another thing about the movie's weird relationship to space is there are so many shots that are just extreme close-ups on angles of geometry or a part where two walls meet, or maybe half the frame is the wall and the other half is like, I don't know, the crest of a window. Or there are shots of hallways, but because the lensing is really flat, or there's something weird where it just looks like you're looking at a flat surface, even though it's clearly a curve in a hallway. And these shots come without rhyme or reason, without communicating much. Mark Regan says in the filmmaker interview that those shots are there to show the passage of time, which is not particularly 100%. Clear. Again, the tone of that filmmaker interview is also, he's very cagey. Like, he does not want to say more than he absolutely has to.
Yeah, David, every time they ask him about money, he just says investors and people. And you're like, okay. At one point, he's directly asked if an actual VFX house worked on the movie. And he said, people who knew things to do things on computers. And I was like, okay.
Most of the movie, I'd say 95% of the movie are actors kind of posed like mannequins in these barely disguised rooms talking about neuroscience or just describing rooms to each other. And a plot kind of happens in the background. But like there is a bit where there is a killer who's invisible. But
also not?
He's visible at parts, but other times you can't see him. Those parts are quite scary. But when you can see him, he looks kind of like, I don't know, he's such like a killer in a movie type killer. I was thinking of the guy in Too Many Cooks or something. Like, we're just so like extremely posed and snarling, and he has like an idle animation with his knife. But the bits of dialogue about him are way, like, there's way less of it than bits talking about, like, it's interesting that you can repair the nerves in the hand, but not in the spinal cord. Or this is this patient's MRI, and this is, I believe the exact phrase is the MRI of a normal brain. Like, that is the foreground. And the actors, you know, that they're not directed. At least Mark Regan claims they're not directed in the interview. He says, like, we did one take, I'd answer questions about the characters, but I wouldn't tell them how to say the line.
Yeah, he also shot most of their stuff, unless they're in a two-shot together, doing the scene together, they are filmed separately. like
Yes.
without the other actors in the room to bounce off of. So if you're wondering why a lot of the line deliveries are just like completely almost like value neutral, even when things seem like they should be getting more exciting, or like the plot is literally getting more exciting, they're literally just doing one takes where they're not totally sure like what's happening in the scene, and they were completely separated from each other. And
Right.
Mark Regan confesses that was, I guess, a deliberate choice that he made, where
And that sort of flatness mixed with, again, the topics mostly being neuroscience, or like literally saying, my room has a table with 4 legs. It's a round table, but I'd like to move in a square table sometime.
or just having completely inane conversations about like 2 girls talking about their hometowns and their
Right.
apartment setups, and then it will just cut to a random beat up wooden dresser, and you're like, oh, I guess that scene's over. That's the visual language that he's been establishing of I think what he meant by the passage of time was that like it was like scene like the same way that
Right.
you would cut to like the exterior of a building to be like, we're now in this building, and here's an internal shot of the conversation that's happening
Right.
inside that building. He will just cut to like a dresser in like a room that's kind of abstracted, and then he'll cut back to the conversation, and you're
Right,
like,
yeah.
I don't really know why you went that way with that, but it definitely does disorient you and make you go, I don't understand space or time anymore.
But that's also part of the plot, because one of the big scenes in the movie is again, they put chips in their heads where they can visualize each other. They get like low res visualizations,
Which they pull out of a
each other's
sci-fi
thoughts.
drawer made of paper on a tablecloth that just kind of goes eek, and bam, they have like little kind of invisible chips, and they stick them to their temples and close their
these
eyes
little,
and clear
like,
their minds.
Yellow stickers they put on their sides. And what happens is, I believe how it's explained is, if you think something, then I will see a visualization of it. The quote is, I'll see a basic composition of geometric objects, which is true. It is like super lo-fi.
The blockiest, most amateur Windows 95 CG animation version of what's going on inside your
It looks like the way they're so harshly figurated looks like Mode 7 graphics for the Super Nintendo, if you've ever played like the original Star Fox or something. Like, it looks like that. It's earlier than Nintendo 64, PS1. It is really rudimentary looking. Or like Windows 95 wallpapers, like the Maze wallpaper. It sometimes has that vibe. Or especially the fish. I mean, there's a scene where a guy imagines fish, and these beautiful spherical fish come across the screen that look like the Windows 95 fish. But one of the big things that happens when they're looking each other's minds is they visit a house in their minds, and they're just describing the house to each other, and then there are inserts of what might be that house. And so there are bits where this kind of like seemingly arbitrary passage of time shot style, it becomes like integrated into the plot, which I'm not sure what to make of that, but it happens.
Jamie,
Yep.
I would
What's
love
up?
to hear from you.
I'm not gonna lie, boys. This did not work for me. I did not like the movie, but the parts that I did like, I do like the idea of the polygons, specifically when they're talking to each other, and at first when they're kind of learning the technology, they're trying to decipher what they're seeing, and there is actual like conversation about, I think I'm seeing this, rather than it just being blatantly said. Because when you see the kind of low scale polygon art or whatever, there's certain moments where you could at least think from a movie perspective, like this would be harder to interpret. So I like that they have to have a conversation about it. And then as it goes on, the polygons get like more complicated and more detailed, which I obviously feels intentional, and I think that that's really good too. And then when it starts to dive into, and this, it's like a mixed bag for me, because at first I was already kind of frustrated. So when it was starting the rhythm of it, I was kind of like, get to the point. But then when it did, and the rhythm of it started to become this uncanny kind of uncomfortable thing where, you know, eventually we get this polygon of a killer with a knife, and he kind of just comes out of the wall.
Yeah.
And it feels very supernatural, and it is very creepy. Like, I actually like the just how slow it is, and how just again, uncanny, I think is the word. It just feels so strange. And I think that worked for me. I did really like that. And then
I like when they first get out of it and they're like, wow, it's so clear.
Yeah.
They're like, look at those cubes. Look at those cylinders. My God, technology has come so far. Let's try something more elaborate. And that's when they start being like, imagine birds and imagine flowers. And yeah, then all of a sudden they see a block shape of like the figure of a person. And then it perhaps is stabbing another person. And that's when they decide, oh, we are going into the mind of this woman, and that the plot kicks in, that the woman is like, wow, there's been a lot of murders around here locally, and I have been having these dreams about these murders. So if we can combine this visualization, the state-of-the-art visualization tech where you put it to your brain and your brain summons images, and we give it to this woman who's having premonitions of a murder, maybe we can see the murder before it happens. Maybe we can stop the murder before it happens. Like when a police works with like a psychic and helps them find the assailant, even though at first, again, the images are like, I'm sure the police are going to get a lot of info out of generic gray block number 1 stabs generic gray block number 2.
Right. And
well, there's
but they get more elaborate as they get deeper and deeper into it. And, you know, the animation does become a little bit more expensive looking. I don't know if $5 million worth of more expensive looking, but definitely more.
Yeah. And that plot, like the idea of, oh, we're going to use this experimental technology and then we're going to see murders before they happen or pick up on these psychic wavelengths of the murders, is a very like giallo kind of thing. You could see a movie like Footprints on the Moon or something, which
I think Evan at one point in one of his 50 reviews of the movie, he called it a Michael Snow giallo, and I was like, that's actually kind of accurate too.
Yes,
he has
absolutely.
fun ways of describing this movie. He's watched it enough times to come up with them.
Recently, there was a Michael Snow retrospective in Chicago, which unfortunately I was not able to get to the screenings. But that friend who we subjected, he did not have a great time first time I watched this, so I'll say we subjected this to him.
You're going to have to tell us who this is after the fact. I can tell that you're being very kind by not mentioning them to all the listeners.
well, he then later went to go see Corpus Callosum, I think it is, the Michael Snow movie on 35 millimeter, on Evan's urging, saying it's the closest you'll ever get to seeing one of the prints of After Last Season. And he came out of the movie and texted me, it was like I saw a print of After Last Season. So for all the Michael Snow heads listening, you got to get on this.
Yeah, seeing this in a film setting on 35 millimeter with a bunch of people unsure of what it is that they are experiencing would be a pretty fantastic experience. I think I would very much enjoy that. But I think the thing that's really worth pointing out about this is that I think Jamie's very right that there is stuff in this that's very deliberately designed to be uncanny. There's other elements of this where, again, Perry is talking about whether it is intentional or whether it's not, it doesn't necessarily matter. The whole thing has an uncanny vibe to it. There's something funny to be about the things that are really effectively uncanny and would be in sort of like a murder mystery style film. It does feel like it blends in with the other stuff because it's so uncanny before you get there. Like, it's just the basic. It's going to be talking in circles, so I'm not going to get into it a million times about just basic things about focus or composition or cutting or environments or, you know, anyone who's seen film student ass production values before in your life, you can imagine some of the ones that you would see in something like this, with whether it's the, you know, sort of crude, you know, sort of paper, wood, and tape production design, or the royalty-free sound design and sort of music that's played, even though it's cut in this very intermittent way that freaks me the hell out.
The bit where one of the characters brags about how she just bought a radio clock, and then there's an insert shot of it, and it's literally just a radio and a digital clock next to each other.
Yeah. Like, but that's so deliberate. Like, that to me is crazy. That to me is like, I'm going to deliberately in dialogue call this thing out and get a shot of it, even though I don't have a radio clock.
Right.
Like, that to me is where my brain starts to get more confounded about the thing, because that's something you don't do not intentionally. So, and that's where these, you know, surrealism of it and the minimalism of it started to get me going. Like parts of you will be frustrated. I think for me, the stuff for me that was frustrating was just the stuff where characters would be having an inane conversation with someone else on the other end of the phone, and you don't ever find out who it is they're talking to. So you never even figure out like what the conversation is about or why, which again, you could also claim is just, where the fuck am I? What is this?
Right.
Part of them is looking at schizophrenic brain scans, and maybe that's on purpose. I don't know.
If the film is supposed to make you feel emotional, I will say it did. Because when those scenes happened, I yelled at my television screen. So if you know what, nailed it. Visceral experience. I absolutely had that. So,
you were like, what's going on there?
I literally just yelled, I don't fucking care about your uncle's living room. Like I was screaming it, and my brothers in the other room were laughing and just being like, what are you watching, dude? I was like, I'll tell you after.
Did you like looking at the FBI guy's jacket with like the yellow tape for FBI while he's pacing back and forth?
He got it from like a thrift store or something like that. It's very one of the first things where I was like, oh, I think I know what I'm in for, was when we get the first murder sequence where you just get a guy sitting in a chair alone with a British flag belt. It's the only sort of discernible quality he has. His name is, I believe his name is supposed to be Edward. He gets a couple of shots where he stands next to a chair. Then he sort of walks into a hallway where there's doors made of plywood in a warehouse. The walls are clearly some sort of paper. The basic geography and geometric shape of it doesn't make sense. You're like, I don't really know who this guy is or what his deal is or where he is. I think he's meant to be in the dorm. He's discovered to be dead, I think a shot later, by another student having a separate, unrelated conversation on her phone. And he has just some sort of chest wound. And you assume he's meant to be stabbed by the killer. And I was just kind of like, oh, we're moving on from that. There's nothing related to that. I think there's, or is that do they have a newspaper shot where they say that there's like killings that are happening?
It's not a newspaper. It is text printed out on like a stapled series of pages.
Well, what is a newspaper if not a text stapled out on?
Right. Which in the interview, Mark Regin says, it's not meant to be a newspaper. It's meant to be a Yahoo News story that someone printed out. So it's not an error.
Oh man, he's good. He's got an answer for everything.
I mean, he's got an answer for everything. He's got to figure it out, man.
He nailed it.
I know I made a big thing about like, oh, it doesn't really matter, but I do love the interview. I love hearing
the interview is fantastic. I felt reading the interview that I had a deeper appreciation for what I was watching, because he was actually answering everything. He was being careful, almost like an athlete, like not to really give you the juicy information, but he was giving you an idea of what he thought about the movie and what he thought the movie was, and that was deeply revealing.
Right. And I want to say about that murder sequence, because that's the sequence that has the shot where the guy is standing looking into the darkness, and my friend was like, I think there's something in the movie looking back at me.
That is a creepy shot, I'll be honest. The one of him looking down the dark hallway where it just looks like it's two walls with two plywood doors and then like a black void past that. And that shot, you could argue, is something in the lo-fi world of like David Lynch.
Yeah, it looks like that one painting of the dog. You know, I'm talking about the painting of the dog at the threshold of the black door that goes around on social media every 3 months. But something else about that is that's a great way to just, I don't know, talk about the weird colors and textures of the movie, because everyone wears these very like muted pastel shirts and they all wear blue jeans. And the walls are all like blue or tan or sometimes like a garish pink. And these CG sequences, it's not like Johnny Mnemonic, where it's like a colorful extravaganza. It's mostly like grays and then muted colors. When I was watching this with another friend of mine one time, who has seen it 3 times. He hates it. He'll watch it again anytime with me. He was getting really frustrated, but was saying like, "Oh, these shots, that's just wallpaper. It's like Mark Rothko," but he still gives it 1 star. He pointed out that all these close-ups of like nothing that get really overlit, like the lighting in this movie is crazy. Everyone casts like Fritz Lang shadows on these surfaces. The close-ups overlit, just you become very aware that this movie was shot on 35 millimeter film.
You are very aware it's shot on 35 millimeter film.
Shot on 35 millimeter film because it is lit like crazy, and it's just, I don't know. For me, I just like watching the textures of the walls and the weird clothes, and
that is definitely what you need to meditate on. I think if you are, paying attention to what it is that's happening in this movie, because your eyes will drift.
Yeah.
There's not much there because of the minimalist production design in general. Like frequently you will look at an empty room with like white paper on the wall, or with like a single chair in it, or like a table or a 90s computer, or, there's one shot where the guy is in a room on a phone and there's just like half of a fire extinguisher is in the room.
Yes.
And it doesn't really make sense why it's there or what it would be used for. And they're afraid the paper is going to catch on fire or something. I'm not exactly sure. Rooms look like various basements, sometimes dressed in sheets. The lighting is incredibly harsh and directional in a way that creates these really, really stark shadows on the wall, like you would see, I don't know, in like a school play or something like that. Like that. Like it's like it's hard to exactly. Again, like I feel like we're just describing
a dream.
It doesn't sound real. What I'm describing to you doesn't sound like decisions somebody made, but somebody did, and they put it out into the world. They dropped it. They mic dropped it, and then just like walked away. They did one filmmaker magazine interview, and we're like, everyone else can analyze this and meditate on it and spend their time thinking about what it is that I made here. And I think that it speaks to something that people clearly, maybe it's a niche community of people want to do that. People are talking about this movie in some capacity. Did you say someone screened a print of it?
No. Someone screened a print of Corpus Callosum, the Michael Snow movie, which my friend went to under the promise that'll be the closest thing to being a print.
Some boutique label should find Mark Region and be like, "Hey,
God.
buddy,
yeah,
where is it?"
Pretty sick.
I would love that, but I mean, that's great. For people who are in the camp of, it's a prank, or I've heard, because Evan spent a lot of time on a Facebook community for this, and someone said it was like really directed by Francis Ford Coppola. They're the Spike Jonze truthers, and I gotta say, Mark Region just disappearing. It's good evidence for, maybe this guy didn't just drop a mic and disappeared. He dropped a mic and then released Her 4 years later.
Possibly.
You never know.
Hard to say. I don't know. I would have questions about how he came to his basic visual grammar choices. If it was Spike Jonze, or if he was just finally let his freak flag fly and was like, this is what I really want to do with my career. But boring Hollywood studios make me shoot coverage and close-ups of actors talking to each other, rather than just like filming a 2-shot of actors having a conversation and then switching between, and I counted this, 6 different shots of a 2-shot of a wide that doesn't change the angle by more than like 3 degrees, maybe. Just slightly adjusted ones. They're practically jump cuts, but they're not. They clearly are moved. The composition has changed enough that you're like, he did this on purpose. Yeah. And that's the stuff that tantalized me about the movie. As I went, there's a lot of obvious ineptitude in so many things that are happening here, but there's a lot of things where you're like, ineptitude doesn't explain that. It doesn't, and maybe it doesn't need to be explained, but it was enough to get my brain going. Clearly something's being communicated here. Even if I don't know exactly what it is or why it is, I was sitting there going, no one would film a scene like this. no one has filmed a scene like this, and and there was something about me, and I don't know if that's something wrong with me, where I just went, huh, okay, show me what else you got. Let's see, keep going. What else you got in here?
The other part that I did like was the ghost encounter. I think that is really cool. I actually thought that was like, I like the way he sets up the simplicity of the items moving, but it's kind of getting closer to them as it goes. I like that it does these close-ups of them getting sliced and stuff like that. Like, it's, to me, honestly, that felt like in that sequence, and then also some of the polygon sequences, that felt to me like the most controlled and well directed. Even the editing was I think better than the rest of the movie, and the I don't know, it just felt the most coherent, I guess. I
feel like the language of a ghost scene just kind of translates, like it, like just having the idea of like a malevolent invisible force just kind of attacking these characters, even if it is attacking these characters in a kind of humorous way, where it is like, I'm gonna open this door, creak it open as slowly as possible, and you're just gonna have the one guy, Matthew, be like, hey, who's there? And then
he's gonna push the bins out of the way.
Yeah, just crates start sort of slowly shuffling across the floor. A rolly office chair like kind of moves slightly, and they're like, this is terrifying. And then the presence starts like slashing at his arm, and it really did kind of feel like if a ghost possession movie was like made by me and my friends when I was like 12, and I would be like, Jamie, start yelling and falling, and and then all of a sudden, like, the chair next to the wall. What's going on there?
Yeah, I like and I do like the way that it's directed. Is at least to me, it felt like excuse me, the way that he moves around, or at least the way that this invisible ghost moves around, is kind of like it felt like he was a physical presence rather than just this supernatural thing going from corner to corner or teleporting or whatever it was, because it was taking the steps towards them, and there was something, I guess, more, I don't know, like physically there with them that felt kind of uneasy and kind of scary. So that part did work for me. Especially,
what did you think about the part where they reveal that it was just a terrible daydream the guy was having, but it also wasn't a dream?
Well, yeah.
It was real.
Yeah, because they do end up looking at like a photo of was it the killer or one of the students? I have to look at my notes, but regardless, and the dream reveal, I don't know about that for me as well, but I don't. Some of these things feel like if it is a prank, or some type of like, him almost making a little bit of a joke, but still trying to come up with some interesting ideas. Those things do work, but I don't know, man. Like a lot of it when I was watching it, it just felt like the guy was making decisions on the fly. Some worked, some didn't, and like even the camera movements, I feel like was him going, you know what, I need a slightly different camera angle because that would be what you do. And he just didn't come up with like a different enough camera angle. And it could be on purpose. I have no idea, but I never felt that way. I always felt like
it doesn't cut in from the master and go, here's the conventional shot of this person talking this way and the reverse shot of that person talking back to them, and you getting closer based on, maybe the intensity of what it is that they're saying or the feelings that they're having. It was literally just, I'm cutting because a movie cuts to different shots, but these are all just some variation of abstracted and weirdly obscure wide shots of the same scenes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so and maybe it's a commentary on like the filmmaking itself, but that's what it would feel like. Cause I don't know, maybe there's an interpretation on how that applies to the story itself. But to me, if he's doing it through the filmmaking, I just don't even know what he's trying to say there beyond like, hey, isn't this kind of, like, if it is intentional, like it's a joke, then I get it. But if it's not, and it doesn't feel that way throughout the movie, I don't see how much is intentional for me. It just doesn't work that way for me, I guess. I was trying to get on board, and you know what? The thing is too, when we've talked about movies like this that are like considered so bad it's good or whatever, and I don't like that term. I know Josh doesn't either. Perry, I'm sure it seems like you're also not a fan of that general like, I like it completely ironically thing. Like I like to genuinely like something. And so I don't think that intention necessarily even matters sometimes. It's just whether or not it he's doing it, it needs to hit me in a way that still feels like it's not just a guy making a bad movie. And
Right.
and to me it just was that, and I feel like I'm the party pooper right now, but it just
it's all good.
yeah.
No, I don't think so, man. I think
No.
that there's a lot of people who I have even my mutuals rating bar is split like across the board between people who hate it and between people who love it. And my favorite part of the entire thing was reading the reviews and seeing them basically sound identical to each other. And
sure, yeah, that's the thing. Probably my complaints are off. Like people are like, yeah, that's why it's fucking amazing. So I think it's one of those things that I'm just like, I don't see through the code. You know what I mean? Like I don't quite get it. And I would like to say, hey, maybe one day. But to be honest, unless one of my friends sits me down and goes, you want to watch this for fun, I won't be putting this on voluntarily. So it's just one of those things that I feel like, you know, it just is what it is.
This is why we have Perry here, because Perry's here to be like, you guys should watch this. You should put it on. You should. And every one of your listeners should put it on at some point. I
do want to say though that there are some other things that I think are like fun, and I think in these moments intentional. And there's one joke where they're like talking about the communication. They're communicating through what they're seeing through the telepathic device that they're using or whatever. And it's like when they're first doing it, and there's a joke where it kind of goes back and forth, and he's just like, did you see a cylinder? And she's like, no, I saw a basket. And then it just cuts to him for not even maybe a second, and he says nothing, and then he cuts to a wide shot of them, and he just goes, okay, let's try again. And for some reason the rhythm of that made me laugh out loud, and so I kind of liked that, and that felt like an intentionally timed joke. And then the other one was that when the killer gets revealed physically, he's hilarious. I don't know what the fuck he was instructed to do, but his delivery when he's like trying to get the access code from the dead body's so funny.
I'm just looking for the digits to the access code or whatever.
And then him coming in, and he like hears a sudden sound, and his movement of like, I'm shocked and scared all of a sudden is so, it's silly. And again, he could have just been a bad actor, but it worked for me, and I thought that was very funny. So there were moments in that I also enjoyed.
I mean, I liked the bit and found it funny when they wake up from the terrible dream, which is only kicked in because like they see this elongated sort of animation of like a woman in a yellow blouse with her arm bleeding, though we can't see that. They describe that happening, and she sort of like throws a cube at a wall and makes random noises, and a blank-faced person, walks through the wall. They have like a generic sort of gray spike in their hand, and there's this weird like keyboard, almost like such a cheap keyboard, it sounds like a kazoo like Thriller score that kind of kicks in while the audio is cutting in and out, and you see the glitchy movement of the killer doing the stabbing motion or whatever. And then we see sort of like the real version kind of play out, where we see the first signs of the killer like knocking on a door, and he's got a bloody knife, and you get this really creepy exterior shot of the house that once again feels like kind of like late David Lynch. And you're not exactly sure how this, I guess you're supposed to be assuming that like this vision they're seeing is a really lo-fi version of this actual murder that's taking place. And when there's this incredible cut from Matthew, the main guy in the film, stepping out, and he comes back into the room after this vision wearing a coat. And he's wearing the coat to let you know that he left the room and like went outside and did something. And he basically says that he stepped outside and heard about a woman trapped in a room and was stabbed to death in her house. And I was like, as if like a newspaper boy went by him as he stepped out to like smoke a cigarette and was like, lady, your vision came true. And she hears that, and she goes, this is too much for me. I'm going to step outside and get some fresh air. And that's what kicks in the whole sort of ghost sequence that turns out to be this terrible dream that he's having, which he describes to her as this terrible dream. And she's like, wow, that is a terrible dream. Anyway, let's go back to this psychology questionnaire. And that to me was one of the best jokes in the movie, where they're just like, let's go back to asking each other sort of boring questions like, how would you decorate your dorm if like you had the option to? And they really draw it out. The guy's like, well, am I decorating it for like a special event? She's like, no, just like in general, like what would you do? And she's like taking notes about what he would do. And he has an incredible answer to what he would do if he would change any of the events that have happened to him in the past 48 hours. Nothing to do with the killing the watching of the killings. Like, he's had a pretty eventful like last couple of hours, but the thing that he would change is he's like, I went to a lecture on Thursday and I was a little sleepy I didn't pay that close attention. I would have like went to bed 2 hours earlier and paid more attention to the lecture. And anyway, they're having a real this is the movie's version of like the mundane things that students talk about, or the realistic things that students talk about, as Mark Region would say. And they just keep getting interrupted by the more fun, weirdo, uncanny giallo film happening around the film, which is actually around the time that the killer with the knife finally arrives in the flesh for the character. And he literally arrives screaming about the digits to the access code or whatever. But there's also just like a dead employee sort of like half hanging out of one of the fake like hallway doors, and you're supposed to assume he's just killed somebody else. And he walks into the room with the knife, and it's a repeat of the ghost presence. And so his vision that he says was a terrible dream literally starts to happen, where a guy slowly opens the door, slowly creeps in. He's holding a knife. He's ready to stab somebody. And maybe the funniest thing in the entire movie happens. A chair just gets hurled at him and knocks him out.
That is I laughed out loud pretty hard. And it looks like the director just was like, "Hey man, we're gonna throw a chair at you.
You're gonna eat a chair."
Shot, yeah, that's so funny, man.
I know that you're not Tom Cruise, but you're gonna eat this chair.
That's a real stunt. That looked like a real stunt right there.
And they briefly think that like the chair is talking to them, but it turns out it's one of the victims of the killer, a man named Craig, who is a ghost, who is a real ghost, who then describes he just threw a chair at this guy, but he describes that he can't lift up anymore. Like, he's too tired. So he can't lift a backpack, but then he tries to lift a ruler, which briefly he can. He shows them that he can lift a ruler, and he's like proving his sort of physical existence. And again, none of the details of this make any sense. But at this point, the uncanny vibe of the entire thing has meant you go, yeah, why not? The ghost can lift a ruler, but he can't lift a backpack. And also there's something sad about the fact that the ghost slowly loses control of even being able to lift the ruler, and it just eventually drops it. Strange things are afoot at what's the corporation name? Did anyone write it down?
Polaris or something?
Hang on.
It's on one piece of paper at one point in the movie.
Perolis, because there's also the exterior shot that's a photograph of a building with Perolis Corporation just sort of superimposed over it.
Right, because these are you're meant to assume these are like resident medical students who just got like an internship at this corporation where they are researching this technology. And then it turns out that the killer is trying to get this technology right. He's, this has a William Gibson plot almost. It's kind of crazy.
I mean, another movie kind of like New Rose Hotel.
Yeah, there you go. Like, it's just like there's corporations, and it's lo-fi, and there's a conspiracy to kill people over some sort of object of technology. William Gibson, close enough. We got there.
The critic Henry de Corneth compared it to both J.G. Ballard and Elaine Robbe-Grillet, which I think is fair, especially the Elaine Robbe-Grillet comparison, where like...
I don't know that I've read Elaine.
He wrote the script for Last Year at Marienbad as well, but his books...
There you go.
Yeah, his books are like... He has this book called Jealousy, that is just like geometrical descriptions of this banana plantation and like figures moving through it. And I can see that. So throw him into with William Gibson and J.G. Ballard and Mark Rothko and Michael Snow and
yeah, Jamie, what do you think? Do you think lo-fi, no budget Last Year in Marienbad? Could that be something?
You know what? Yeah, because oddly enough, Last Year in Marienbad frustrates me too. I think that's a great thing.
There you go.
I think that's a beautiful movie, but for me, I just feel like I'm in a beautiful space and a Frenchman won't leave me alone. And I'm just like, please leave me alone, dude. Stop talking to me about the past that may or may not have happened, bro. I'm done. I don't care. Get away from me. So yeah.
Yeah, like last year, Breaking Bad, they're posed like statues. They're all wearing very
So
stylish
true.
regional fits. You got the classic Massachusetts jeans, and
Dude,
it's
I
great.
know I experienced this before already. There it is.
Yeah.
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 Okay. You know what?
Yeah.
You know what? Last year, Marienbad could have used a Giallo killer and a conspiracy for William
True.
Gibson technology.
True. Oh man, that's hilarious.
God. And I got was there anything that we missed in here? There was I guess there's the point where the security for the corporation arrives, but it turns out it's an FBI agent in like a fake thrift shop windbreaker who ends up delivering the exposition to again a phone who you don't know who's on the other end, naming the killer as a former like scorned employee hired to steal this technology, which is why he was killing all the students who were working on this research project. So again, by the end of it makes like technical sense, I think. It takes a weird path to get you to that point. And it also ends with Matthew also talking on the phone to a nameless person that the guy committed crimes in other states and he lived a few miles away from the facility or something like that. And then he just starts talking about some random guy he knows who's on like some hot mineral spring water vacation that he's on. I was like, yeah, once again, just space and time. What are they? By the end of this film, I was not exactly sure who these characters are, what their relationships are to each other, how much they cared about the fact that they had friends who were dying and that the technology was being stolen, and they used the technology to technically prevent the guy from stealing it and killing people over it. And the very ending of the movie is I guess the Craig ghost kind of being real and fucking with Matthew's jacket, and then a final scene with two women outside a snowy house who it turns out one of them is Craig's mom, who's like grieving her son, and also repainted a room in the house that possibly I guess could have been his room, and a woman comforting her and saying that she turned it into a really neat room.
That's good.
And I guess cathartically getting over the experience of her son being murdered over technology, but then also getting revenge on the killer in return, and actually technically disarming the killer by throwing a chair at him.
Which is a great shot again. I will say. That was in my notes.
Yeah. So after last season, maybe if we're pivoting towards reductive rating round, this for me is one of the rare examples of I don't know. I have not decided on a rating yet. I did give it the little heart because I will say it's completely unique, and I did not have a negative experience with the movie. It is absolutely one of the most bizarrely inept movies I've ever seen, that regardless of filmmaking skill or understanding of visual grammar, I liked Evan's description of it as a movie that feels almost fundamentally designed to break down your understanding of visual grammar, so you almost can't apply normal filmmaking critiques to the movie because the uncanniness completely disobeys them. It's like, yeah, you could sit here and be like, that shot's not in focus. That composition is garbage. That lighting is horrific. The environment and production design does not make a lick of sense. Half of the audio sounds like it's being funneled through a tin can. No actor feels like they're saying anything remotely natural or human to another person. Half of the dialogue they say is said to people you don't know or ever find out about. Half of it feels unrelated to the character or the plot. You don't know how many of these characters are related, with the exception of Matthew and Sarah as the two leads, who you at least know are medical interns who are working at a facility and experimenting with a piece of technology that lets them see a killer that is killing students around them, though they don't actually seem that perturbed about the student body count even prior to stepping into that room, that psychology exercise room. And they sort of kind of seem to flatly be like, oh, hey, we're seeing visions of murder. We should explore that further and see what happens there. But regardless of anything that you could possibly say about this movie, it is absolutely hypnotic and unique and confounding. And I did honestly, as much as you will want to roll your eyes, I did find it surrealist and dreamlike, and I don't know if it was done, what was done on purpose and what was not done on purpose, but this absolutely is at a certain point a telekinetic sci-fi serial killer movie, and it does live up to that. And there are sequences of a ghost coming in and attacking the characters and them being freaked out. There are sequences where you look at the production design and how abstract and strange it is and lo-fi it is, where you're like, that is a hallway clearly made in a warehouse with 2 doors, and it has an endless black void, and there is a killer in there, and it is armed with that dread, that uncanny dread to it. And like, so there are moments in this where you can feel a guy, I think, accidentally arriving at genuinely experimental, no budget, outsider art, horror thriller territory. And for me, that was enough to, override maybe some of the things that felt annoyingly detached or frustratingly puzzling about the movie. I was able to be like, this is a completely one-of-a-kind thing I've never seen before. And maybe my brain is leaking out of my ears, and maybe anyone who goes online and says this is the most beautiful piece of art they've ever seen is an absolute psycho that we should follow and make sure that they're okay.
Get more recommendations.
Or get more recommendations for them, because who knows, you will see more things that you don't know what the fuck you're watching. I ended up having a good time with the movie, so I'm putting it firmly in that, this is the same rating most recently I gave to Megalopolis. So firmly in that territory for anyone who wants something similarly odd and hypnotic and strange. So yeah, I don't know. Jamie, how about you, brother?
Also put this in Megalopolis for different reasons. So yeah, I don't know. For the most part, honestly, this didn't work for me. I do think most of the things that are done well are probably accidentally done. Now, I don't think that really matters, to be honest. I think you can make good art accidentally. I really do believe that. But I think it's just a matter of like your subjective experience while you watch this, whether or not that is something that it works or it doesn't. And for me, it just didn't. For me, mostly it came off as inept and lazy. And I just, I want to watch that or listen to that interview, because it does feel like, I don't know, like certain things maybe were intentional, but then there's other things even in his answers feel like, oh, I've come up with an answer for that. Don't worry. I'm confirmed. Yes, I did that intentionally. And I had a reason for that after years of being able to think about it. That's what it feels like to me. And again, though, then I wrestle with myself. Like, I write lyrics, and sometimes I'll write something that I don't necessarily know exactly what it means until I put it in the context of something. But again, right now, I feel like I'm stretching a little bit to say, there's more here than there is for me. I just don't like it. But I do think he has interesting ideas here. Like, I do like them telepathically seeing their visuals like in their minds and trying to figure out a murder. I think that's great. I think that the polygon thing is really cool. And I do think that as it goes on, especially when it gets to this like blank face serial killer polygon thing, the way it moves and the lack of audio and real like score is very uncanny and is honestly kind of creepy, and did get under my skin a little bit. And it's interesting because you kind of have to go into that slow feed of the polygons at first, and then that slowness becomes more uncanny and more kind of just nightmarish and a little bit surreal. So I do think that part of it is really cool. I also did like the ghost sequence, and there's a couple moments that I do think are good comedy beats. And most of those I think were intentional as well. So yeah, for me, like the dialogue was really grating me, I have to say. I already said the whole thing where I yelled at my screen when they were talking about their uncle's living room for the 50th time.
Did you want to hear his answer to the interview on that specific?
Sure.
Because the guy did ask, talk about the dialogue. He said, I tried to keep the dialogue simple because we had little time to shoot the scenes. I wanted to make the dialogue realistic. The dialogue would be something that you would hear in a normal conversation. This type of dialogue also serves as a contrast to the intense and disturbing parts of the film.
Yeah. Okay. Fucking dude, like, okay, you can't we watch movies for a reason, and I don't think one of the reasons we watch movies is to listen to nonsense dialogue that has nothing to do with anything else in the movie.
But it's such an enlightening response to understanding what he thinks about them, because he's just like, yeah, I'm sure that he's maybe like, he's like, this is what I think medical students talk about. Even though they're in a crazy situation where fellow students are being murdered, he's like, well, you know, at a certain point, a med student, you know, lives in a dorm and has to talk about their uncle with somebody. I don't know.
I guess it's just the way that it's like connected and in between every other thing that feels like they should be more.
No, absolutely.
You know, it's like there's a murder happening, but hey, it is what it is. I think I'm going to give it the like light 2. I'm not going to lie. When I ended, I wanted to give it the 1. But I do truly believe that I really don't give that rating to things unless I feel it is completely just like worthless. And I don't think that this is worthless at all. I do think that there's like, I like that there's some intention here, whether or not we're still deciphering where it is. It's obviously there. And I do think that some of these ideas do come to fruition at a certain point, and you can see them on screen. So I think that that's there's something there. I don't know. It's too much for me. Too much for me. Yeah.
You broke Jamie, Perry, but for you, Perry.
Josh, like you, I'm going to give it 5 stars. It's definitely a 5 for me. It's a movie that I've seen 4 or 5 times. I've seen a bunch, and I don't know, it really doesn't feel like anything else. And I know that's not an inherently good or bad thing, but thankfully what it does feel like is something I'm always happy to just sort of get lost in. Again, I love the textures. I love how weird every room is. I love the weird jeans everyone wears. I keep bringing that up.
The flag belt.
The flag belt. I love the rhythm of the dialogue.
Flag belt?
I love them talking about nerves in your hands versus nerves in the spine. I love descriptions.
The
of
MRI
rooms.
machine in Grandma's house.
The MRI machine. I genuinely I love being in this world, and it's a type of movie that just, I don't know, it opens up new vistas, new directions for me to see what could be an enjoyable movie. You know, how do I understand what an enjoyable movie is, what a worthwhile movie is? It helps expand that a bit for me. So I just love this one. I'm giving it the full 5.
I'm learning a lot about Perry's mind and Perry's friend group, that you have watched this as many times you have watched this with many friends, both friends who love it and want to rewatch it all the time, and friends who hate it and are just willing to rewatch it with you guys. I think that is there's beautiful things happening there.
I mean, anyone who wants to do a rep screening in Chicago, you know, this is the city for it.
Yep.
We all love it.
Please
here.
contact Perry.
And I'll tell you a story about this. I was out of town for the past week, and so today I had the day off, and I just did the double feature right before we recorded. And my fiance came home from work, and I was still watching After Last Season, and they were so happy that I took the film off of my headphones, put on the speakers, and we just watched the last hour of After Last Seasons together, and we were just talking about how cool it is and how much we love it. And it's a movie that brings people together.
Hell yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And you know what? You listening out there, you might sound like you are just like, I agree with Jamie. So this doesn't sound like it's for me. It doesn't. It sounds like I'd prefer to experience it through the Red Letter Media guys roasting it. That might be you. You might also be the person, though, you put it on and you're like, I am actually entranced by what is being projected into my brain right now. And the beauty is that both of those audience members exist out there somewhere listening to this right now. You should give it a go. It is unlike anything I've ever seen. I do thank Perry for bringing it on and making us talk about it, and for finding out that actually did sort of connect, in the sense that we do have psychic serial killings taking place across both of these. But I think that's going to wrap it up for this week. That was once again Angel Dust from 1994 and After Last Season from 2009. Thanks again, Perry, for coming on every year and always showing us something that quite unlike anything we've ever seen. I think we can rely on you annually to do that for us. Is there anything going on in Perry World that you can let us know? Do you have any new writing or anything like that that the people can find online somewhere?
Yeah, if you go to my website, perryruhland.com, just my name, it has my list of publications, which is always updating. I've had a few new ones lately, horror stories, weird stories, and later this summer in the wonderful journal Chthonic Matter Quarterly, I'm actually going to have a sort of parapsychological thriller of my own coming out called Tonight I Will Split His Heart with a Knife. So keep an eye out for that one.
That's an awesome title.
Hell yeah.
Thank you.
Is.
If you like the title, you can read it being repeated many, many times in the text of the story. So,
hell yeah.
Can't wait. Yeah. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time where we are going to be over on the Patreon feed, as Jamie alluded to. We are going to be talking about Joe Don Baker, one of the legendary exploitation actors we previously talked about in Walking Tall. There are two major films of his we haven't talked on the show that it's a good excuse to finally cover because he recently passed away. Charlie Varick, directed by Don Siegel, where he is co-starring with Walter Matthau. It's one of his biggest movies that he was a part of. But we're going to be talking about another Phil Carlson movie, the same director as Walking Tall, the noir director who made it kind of into the exploitation era, very interestingly, a movie called Framed, which I haven't seen yet, except for seeing one clip of it probably go semi-film Twitter viral, maybe like once a year or so, where someone goes, has anyone seen the most insanely dangerous looking stunt? And does anyone know what movie it's from? It's from the movie Framed. I will not spoil that for anyone who hasn't seen it. I will not spoil it for Jamie. But we are going to be talking about Charlie Varick in one of the craziest stunts of the 1970s and the legendary sweaty 70s exploitation actor Joe Don Baker, all in one episode over on the Patreon next week. So you can look forward to that. And then in 2 weeks' time, we are going to be back with a very special guest that I'm going to spoil by telling you what this double feature is. We are going to be talking about the Tim Burton movie Ed Wood, and we are going to be pairing it with I'm going to read this from my text messages here, a golden turkey type legendary bad movie classic called Robot Monster, directed by Ed's real life frenemy Phil Tucker.
nice.
I
cool.
don't know what that is, but I'm sure most people already know. We have an Ed Wood correspondent on the show who has talked about, I think, every episode of Ed Wood that we've done, and they have a book about Ed Wood coming out very soon. So that's why that's going to be the subject of that episode that you can look forward to over on the main feed in 2 weeks' time. So look forward to that. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.